We want the backup humanity. We probably should have many kinds of humanity around. I want to be able to see in ultraviolet light. I want to see the patterns of spring flowers like bees see them. I want to be able to hear in ultrasound.
Next up is another frontier of, thought itself, not even technology, nothing. It is the psyche that is driving much of the discussions that we've been having over this entire day, and that is the idea of transhumanism. So while we are talking about AI or gene editing or quantum, there is a band of people who believe that there's no need for humanity to be fixed in this condition of being human in the first place, that it is our right to constantly evolve, and transhumanism is this endless search for the next frontier of being human, even to escape this condition of being human, and maybe meld with machines, maybe use technology for DG immortality, for uploading your brain, for freezing your body, for AI resurrection. These may sound like sci-fi, but there's billions of dollars that are backing this way of thinking. They are the most cutting-edge minds that are thinking like this. And Francis Fukuyama said that transhumanism is the most dangerous idea on the planet. But we have people like Ray Kurzweil, Stephen Hawking, there's Elon Musk, there's Anders Sandberg, there's Nick Bostrom, innumerable people at the cutting edge of science and tech who believe in this idea. So it's a real privilege to have Anders Sandberg here with us today. He is a philosopher, a transhumanist. He teaches at Oxford. He's a polymath. What he most is a mind with absolutely no barriers to thinking fresh. But before we call him onto stage to start exploring these new doors of perception, again, we'd like to share with you a little window into the kind of world that we are talking about.
Connect our neocortex, which is where we do our thinking, to computers. So I believe that will happen.
Neil Harbison was born completely colorblind, and while Neil still can't see color, a device called the eyeborg allows him to hear and sense color.
Elon Musk's brain chip startup, Neuralink, says it has received approval to begin recruiting patients.
My body hardly works at all because I have motor neuron disease, otherwise known as ALS.
If someone has never had vision ever, they were born blind, we still restore vision.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anders Sandberg.
Thank you.
Anders, it's wonderful to have you here. Like I said, you're the most unmoored mind that one can have on a stage. You literally live by no barriers, no boundaries of what is possible. And like it's fascinating to have you here because everything that we are discussing is, like I just said, is being driven by a particular mindset, a psyche, a curiosity, and the morality can come later,
Well, that's the funny part. I think it's important to be curious, but morality is something to be curious about too. There are these sweet problems in science that we want to solve, and sometimes they turn rather bitter if you don't start thinking about the morality. And if there is one big lesson we have learned through the 20th century, it's that morality matters. But that quite often doesn't mean that you slow things down or stop. Sometimes it might mean, oh, we need to do this now. We might need to do it fast instead.
So, because this is a new concept, and I know that some of the most, I would say tuned in minds, even in this audience and hall, when we put out transhumanist, people said, what does that even mean? Yeah. And why is it even important? We haven't figured out how to be human, and you guys are already trying to figure out how to be transhuman, So tell us about the origins of this idea, Anders, and why is it important? Why, for instance, are you a transhumanist?
So let me start with my little story about how I kind of began as a transhumanist. I was 7 years old. I was playing hide and seek, and I hid behind the curtain in a library of a friend's house. And as I was peeking out, waiting for somebody to find me, I noticed a desk full of souvenirs and books. And I realized, being curious, I want to understand what's on that desk. And then I realized, I want to understand what's in all the books in this library. The next thought was, I actually want to understand everything. And the thought after that was, I need to live for a very long time to do it. That is my story, how I became a transhumanist, although it took many years before I finally knew there was a term for it. Transhumanism as a concept is the idea that we can question the human condition and see, can we change it? And some of these changes might be a very good idea. We earlier heard the discussions about why it might be a good idea to slow down or stop or reverse aging. Similarly, why should we be stuck by just being able to think about several things at once? Our working memory are just kind of 5 to 7 objects. What kind of thoughts and insights could we have if we could think wider? What about our emotions? What about experience in nature in the full spectrum?
So for a moment, I'm going to leave aside my, constantly questioning mind and trying to bring us back to just being human. Let me take this ride with you. That it is interesting that you think like this, because even human beings were not necessarily at the state that we're in today. That was not how we were, say, the Neanderthal man or, Homo sapiens or the ones that went before. It has been evolving all the time. And you say that you have a morphological freedom to choose how you might evolve, So, and so let's for a moment not say that this is necessarily the best way of being human. So can you tell us some of the more interesting concepts within transhumanism? Like, what are the different ways you're trying to break out of the barrier of this very limited way of being human that we have today?
So the most obvious thing might be that we want to improve our health. We already are, most or all of us here, enhanced by having this technological immune system called vaccines. We're actually collectively, as a species, designing antibodies and distributing them to meet new challenges. And we're going to get better at that. We might want to automate the process so new diseases will not stand a chance. Similarly, we have a distributed cognitive system. Right now, this is being live streamed out across the internet. People are tweeting, and people might be updating Wikipedia pages if I say something stupid. What is going on is that we have a collective intelligence. Right now, mostly done by people in front of keyboards with a few AI programs. But increasingly, we're developing tools to help us think better. We might, of course, enhance our brains directly. Sometimes through simple means like healthy living, sleeping well. But I just took a cup of coffee. My brain is already mildly enhanced, but it's a standard enhancer. There exist drugs and electrical stimulation that might enhance my abilities in other ways.
But Anders, I don't want you to float around in such shallow waters.
No, let's go deep.
Take us deeper. Where cryogenics, mortality, some of the really wild ideas that you espouse.
So I'm signed up to be frozen if I'm dying. So this little medallion is instructions for the hospital that call this number in America, cool the body with ice, give CPR, inject all the heparin you can find. Doctors usually look very surprised when they read this. And the idea is to freeze me, because we can't save my life maybe in the present, but maybe future technology could save us. So that is still going to require enormously advanced technology, because it needs to fix the damage you get from freezing a body. But still, you have plenty of time to wait if you're frozen. I'm also interested in the possibility of scanning a brain and reconstructing it in a computer. I'm a lapsed computational neuroscientist. I did simulations of tiny parts of a brain. But we're getting better and better tools for taking a brain, an entire brain, and scanning the connectome, the connections, indeed all the synapses between the neurons, and making simulations. Right now, this is still rather primitive. We haven't really succeeded even with an insect yet, but the field is moving fast, and we might envision a future, maybe a few decades away, where we can do this with an actual human brain and get a virtual replica that is now running inside a computer. Interesting scientific and philosophical questions here, of course, about, is that really me? Can a piece of software really be conscious? But if it works, and so then you have amazing possibilities. Now you can make backup copies. You can move across the internet at the speed of light, or be sent by laser beam to a receiver on Mars. And of course, you could have multiple copies, which I desperately need because I have too much to do. Of course, all my copies are going to have too much to do too, so there is a risk here of overpopulation in the server farm. Now, there are many things we can do, both virtually and physically. After all, our bodies. We have already talked about gene therapy. What about doing gene therapy, not just to do therapeutic things like slowing aging, but also give us new abilities, like seeing new colors.
Like seeing new colors?
Yeah. And so naturally, it turns out that there are some women that are tetrachromats. They have 3 color pigments in the eye instead of 4 color pigments instead of 3. So they can see some nuances the rest of us can't. But what about adding a few extra? I want to be able to see in ultraviolet light. I want to see the patterns of spring flowers like bees see them. I want to be able to hear in ultrasound. My friend Todd Huffman implanted a magnet in his finger, and he's been sensing magnetic fields. And I usually ask him when I meet him if he's seen any beautiful magnetic field recently. So far, magnetic art is in infancy. Very few people can appreciate it. But maybe that's going to be a great area of creativity for humans or AIs in the future. So it's about extending the body, extending the mind, extending the ways we can live our lives. And these can go in very different directions. Many of these proposals leave many of my transhumanist friends cold. They say, Anders, why do you care about seeing spring flowers? Isn't it more important to do something else? And others say, oh yes, spring flowers, really beautiful, but all that talk about genes and brains, that makes me nervous. Let's stay away from that for the time being. So there is a lot of pluralism of what directions could be worthwhile. We need to explore this.
So Anders, you know, like I said, I first wanted our audience to just get this. It's literally like a, you know, it's like a matinee show of ideas of just anything wild that can come to your head, you know, like DJ immortality, uploading your mind, cryogenically freezing your body. Like I said, there's no fixity at all to your thought. But I'm going to explore why we would even go down those routes. But I wanted to you're a philosopher, you're a you know, you're thinking millions of years ahead of what are the possible futures. You think long distance futures, you think about aliens. There's literally nothing that you don't think about.
That's the wonder of being in the philosophy department. I can get away with all of this on working hours and tell my boss, look, I'm working on philosophy.
Right. So let me ask you something which was, you know, what's gone before. There was this big argument earlier about consciousness, you know. So when you're looking at consciousness as something so mutable that you could upload your brain, you could die, you could leave your memories behind, your grandchildren could access the memories of Anders Sandberg and ask it questions, you know, and maybe you can intervene in their life problems 50 years later. You're no longer there, but they're talking to you. What does all that say about human consciousness? So the short question is, do you think AI and machine consciousness is true, is real?
I don't know. I don't even know what human consciousness is. I must admit I'm a lousy philosopher of mind. I get very confused every time I try to think about consciousness. Other brain functions I'm willing to make a lot of wild guesses and statements about, but consciousness is hard. We still don't understand it very well. I think we're going to learn from AI, from brain interfacing, from other manipulations of the brain, more about consciousness, but it might very well be that we're still disagreeing about it in 100 years' time. However, my grandchildren, if they access my memories, they might not need my consciousness. Excuse me. Yeah. You see, the limitations of the human body. I need to speak through the same opening. I'm also breathing through and drinking through. Who would have designed it like that?
If you want to know why AI is moving at this breakneck speed, please meet Anders Sandberg. He's like, look at the limitations of the human body. I'm choking in my throat, you know.
Yeah, and it's such a minor annoyance. At the same time, it's also essential. After all, one of the key things about giving a good presentation is to remember how to breathe. That's a very simple biological act. Still, we have only been doing it for 400 million years. We can probably get better at it, but still, that biological act, that groundedness in reality is really important, including for the consciousness question. We're often very conscious about who we are, how it feels, etc. That might be different from that mysterious core part of consciousness that me leaves philosophers confused. But it might also be very important when you start thinking about the AIs. They don't have bodies, or do they? Robots kind of have bodies. You can have simulated avatars for the AI systems. Is that enough to generate an embodiment that really matters? I don't think anybody knows. Far too many people are overly confident about it. But I do think that we're going to see possibilities and challenges to our normal idea about consciousness. For example, some people have fallen into a coma because they have literally fallen into a cold lake.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Some people have fallen into a coma because they literally fall into an icy cold lake. This happens distressingly often in Scandinavia. But the good news is, in that case, you can survive much better than if your body is warm, because life processes slow down and there is no brain activity. And in many cases, they have been revived with no damage done. But they had zero brain activity. There was this break that was not just a deep sleep, no activity, but they are the same person. They claim they're the same person. We don't know whether they have the same consciousness in a true sense, but it certainly seems like it. That's one data point, but I don't know how much more we can do until we can start asking the AI programs or the revived cryonics patient or the uploaded people, does this work? I want to try to upload the philosopher John Searle, who denies that software can be conscious, and ask Sim Searle, do you feel conscious? And if the Sim Searle simulation says, darn, I feel conscious, I need to write a paper, we might have learned something.
So, Anders, you know, we'll come back to the curiosity aspect of this, but you've been very honest. You know, you said that you want to be a transhumanist, you want to live forever, you want to be, you know, have immortality, because you want to understand everything, you want to learn, you're curious, and you want to have enough time to serve that curiosity. But by and large, a lot of the people who are, you know, there's an interesting word that Timnit Gabriel has come up with called the tescrians.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit of a pejorative word, I think.
Oh yes, it's very much intended to think that, oh yes, they're very nasty, selfish people. It's a totally contradictory term, except that I managed to actually fill in almost all the letters in it. I'm a transhumanist. I'm trying to be a rationalist. I'm very much of a long-termist. I think it's important to think about the far future. I am very affiliated with the effective altruism movement. I even have some tinges of cosmism, this idea that maybe we actually have almost a moral duty to spread life, intelligence, consciousness, and complexity in the universe. Now, then we can turn that into politics, or we can recognize that these are very human aspirations.
Right. So, you know, but I still want to come back to this question, which is that when you say it is just for pure intellectual curiosity, it's fascinating, you know, and that's one kind of conversation. But also that almost everyone who is a transhumanist or a cosmist or a effective altruist, you know, we've been trying to explore this idea that it's always garbed in this idea of it's going to be abundance for all, you know, it's expansionism for all. Let's take as much as we can get so that we can give to others. So, you know, this entire movement is also about great concentration of wealth, you know?
Well, that depends on who you're talking to. Actually, quite a lot of people I know are very happy to give away their wealth, and indeed, they like to have a high salary so they can give it away. I think there is something important here about that expansionism, but I think this is part of literally what life has been doing for the past billion years. Living organisms that are not very good at getting nutrient and reproducing are selected against. So life has expanded and fills every niche. But then you end up with this balancing factor. Earth is finite. There is only so much light for the plants. There is only so much nutrients. But nature is constantly trying to find ways around it. And we humans are trying to find ways around our limitation. Now, the interesting thing is evolution has accidentally overreached. It has created this organism that is, on one hand, very successful in being a very common large animal. But we also sometimes think, wait a minute, are we the bad guys? Are we doing something wrong here? And indeed, many people don't think expansion is a good thing. Many people say, no, we need to use less resources or go in a better direction. And I think this is actually part of transhumanism. While it's quite easy to see the exuberant, oh, let's spread life across the cosmos, let's convert everything into maximum value. There are many transhumanists who are actually conservationists. And I think the real issue is questioning our assumptions about how things work. After all, reproduction is something evolution has made us very good at. But we grown-up humans realize, actually we need to select how many children we have to fit both our own budget and the biosphere's budget. So I do think we actually have a lot of opportunity here.
So very quickly, Anders, just earlier again, the directors and creators who were here were feeling very attached to their emotions, to the individualized experience and the internal self. Being a transhumanist, you're not attached to any of that. You don't feel very attached to your emotions, do you?
Yes and no. Some days I'm very happy to intellectualize. I'm wandering around in Oxford and feeling like a proper philosopher, observing my emotions with that bemused philosophical detachment. And then I stub my toe on a stone. And at that point, I immediately start looking, when will the pain signal reach my brain? The C fibers are slower than the alpha beta fibers, and this is very fun to a nerdy neuroscientist like me. Other days, like right now, I'm enthusiastic. I'm trying to convey why I think this is a great possibility, and I do think emotions are important. We change, we adapt, and I think one of the clear signs that you have some problems with your mind is that you cannot adapt. The problem is, for example, with people with emotions that they can't control. That ruins their life. But you don't want to control all your emotions all the time. Then you become an Englishman. And I think we want the balance here.
So you have a very fascinating idea, Anders. He says that the new divide is going to be those who are holdout humans and those who are transhumanists. And you said even, right now it's very expensive to be a transhumanist.
Yes and no.
Only Elon Musk and Ray Kurzweil and maybe you riding on their Concords to Mars can afford to be transhumanists. We can't.
The very anti-transhuman movie Gattaca ends in a way that I think is actually beautiful. You see people entering a spacecraft and they're going business class. A civilization that can send people in business class to space has probably achieved good ways of getting to space, more cheap ways. Generally, new technology tends to be really expensive. But then the question is, does it fall in price? When it comes to gadgets and the medications, they tend to become cheaper exponentially over time, especially once the patent runs out. It's services that are expensive. So if I need to go to an enhancement spa to have somebody massage my genes and upgrade my brain, I need to pay the cost of the doctors and nurses. That is a problem. If, on the other hand, my life extension pill is just a pill, the government will probably soon decide to subsidize that because it saves so much and it becomes cheap and people will want to have it. So we might want to work, if we think it's worthwhile to do this enhancement, to make sure they're not services, that we don't stay expensive. And many forms of enhancement today, like using Wikipedia and smartphones, they're cheap. Everybody's doing it. Many of the medications that look like they might be slowing aging, they're not terribly expensive. Gene therapy, that remains expensive as long as it's experimental and a service. But we might want to make nurse robots and doctor robots because we also want cheap healthcare. And that might be a way of bringing it up. And this is where I get back to my first point about morality. I think we have a moral duty to try to make medicine super cheap. It should be so cheap that you don't have to pay for it, that everybody can get it. It's going to be like those pens you get with a little ad on them, and we can all share, because nobody cares about who owns that particular pen. We want healthcare to be like that. And I think this is where both transhumanists and non-transhumanists should work very strongly together.
So just two very quick questions. You said about this holdout humans. We've constantly been hearing this about, creating abundance for all. These large structures, these technological structures, we talked about concentration of wealth, power, and knowledge. What is the impact of having these huge structures where you say that it'll be through consent. You know, you can be a holdout human, you don't want to be a technologist, you won't participate in these systems. But actually there's no choice, because these structures are so large, they're so powerful, they're so concentrated, that if I want to be a holdout human and not participate in this technological transhumanism, there'll be no services left for me to even access, you know?
My mother, she didn't use a smartphone, and the last years of her life, this was actually a real handicap. She had a hard time reaching out to the Swedish healthcare system and dealing with the authorities, because everything assumed that you had a smartphone. So I would argue that, yeah, this is a good example of how the system is forcing a certain technology onto you. But there is another example, and that's the Amish people in the United States. They are trying to live a simple, low-tech life, and they actually ban many technologies. But we're surrounded by one of the least humble societies you can imagine. But they're also protected by it. What they have done there is set up the right kind of interface. They have a council dealing with the US government, and they are protected because American laws protect minorities, etc. I think we can do the same thing for holdout people. And indeed, I would strongly support this, because as a transhumanist, I'm also very aware that I might be wrong. I might do an enhancement that kills me. I might find that some branch of transhumanity is going off after something that turns out to be fool's gold. It's not worth it. They have lost value. We want to back up humanity. We probably should have many kinds of humanity around. And I think that is something we all should be aiming for, making practical.
Right. So just last question back to the idea of consciousness. You know that you said that it's the most difficult thing to solve. Why is that, Anders? I haven't quite understood.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about qualia, you know, and that this is so difficult to understand who is this observing self, what are they experiencing, isn't it very evident that it's really just a lot of neurobiology? You know, that if you switch off any particular part of your brain, you stop feeling those things. You know, it's not like there's a observing self that can feel outside of this body and outside of the neurobiology. So if even your potassium, you have a potassium dip, the personality of Anders Sandberg will change. You know, if you have a sodium dip, that will change. I have a thyroid problem. I take a little tiny pill every day. If I don't take it, my whole personality, my sense of well-being shifts. You know, so consciousness seems to be, I mean, it's not difficult to understand why we experience color or why a crab feels pain. But as that structure gets more complex, your experience of your external reality also gets more complex, and your response to it is more complex. So will you help us understand, like, why is consciousness such a difficult topic?
So I think the problem usually is that we talk about many things as consciousness. It's like a big suitcase where we crammed in a lot of clothes and other things we think might need, but they have very little to do with each other. We need to unpack it and do different piles of things. One is being conscious of things, and then there is our self-consciousness, our model of who we are and how we function. That one is pretty obviously a lot of fakery. We're just making up who we are most of the time based on what we find around us, our memories, etc. My memories can change. That could change a bit of who I am. My mood and my chemistry definitely can change. Right now I'm having a bit of jet lag. That is definitely changing the kind of Anders that's sitting here. But maybe that's not terribly important. I can still roughly tell the same ideas. The real core hard part is the qualia, that kind of core thing. Why does it feel like anything sitting here talking to you? Because it could just have been atoms moving around. And many people would argue that software doesn't feel anything, even if it pretends to cry, even if it pretends to have emotion. It's all pretend, there's nothing behind it. I'm not so certain. And normally I would say, I know you're conscious because you behave like a conscious being, namely me, and I know we have very similar brains. So since I know I'm conscious, I should expect you to be conscious. But the AI, it's not built like me, it might not function like me, so I can't really tell anything. I do think that is a big problem because we don't have that direct contact to other minds. Maybe we can use a neurointerface to try for that, but now you might say, maybe I'm making up what I'm getting from the other brain. We can't be certain. I think this uncertainty will always be with us.
I'm going to leave it at that because I have, we've kind of been really running behind time suddenly. But there are many big political questions and deeper philosophical questions. Because like I said, there's a lot of wealth and money that's backing this way of thinking, and it's definitely taking the world towards a particular direction. Some of the criticism of transhumanists and this whole band of technologists in Silicon Valley is that you're not looking at necessarily near-term problems and redistribution and how to make being human better. You're looking at some faraway time of some utopia that none of us may access.
But it's worth noticing that the start of transhumanism in England in the 1920s was all full of communists. Literally, JBS, Haldane, Bernal and others, they believed socialism was the future. And then they believed that the proper communist society will of course modify humans into cyborgs, etc. Transhumanism is not necessarily tied to a strongly individualist pro-market view. I happen to be somewhat of that kind, but I have friends who are social democrats. They are Christian transhumanists. They take very different views. I think the question is, are there tools that are good for achieving certain ends? We want the technologies that help us enhance, but we also need goals to enhance for. Why are we doing it? And I think when we're worried about concentration of wealth, a lot of it has to do with many of the new technologies have scaling abilities that favor natural monopolies. It's hard for there to exist more than one Facebook. It's hard for there to be a competitor to Google. And that centralizing force of certain technologies is scary. And I think we might want to figure out ways of handling that. This, of course, also goes to the debates about AI safety. My institute in Oxford, the Future Humanity Institute, have been involved in this for a long time. And we are kind of on the doomer side. We're really worried about our ability, or rather inability, to control super intelligent systems. And we better go slowly there before we burn ourselves. But the problem is, if you open source it, it's going to be hard to control, but it's going to be many people democratically playing around with it. If you put it under control of governments or big corporations, it might be easier to control, but now we got an enormous amount of power in hands of people we might not fully trust. This is a deep dilemma.
Right. I think maybe I should have phrased my question differently, and we could speak about that outside, is maybe the question is not even about consciousness. It is about super intelligence, as you said. That if these systems get more and more and more complex and they get more and more and more intelligent, that thing that Daniel Susskind said earlier also was that the approximation of intelligence and then those impacts on society are again a different order of impact. They don't have to feel like human beings. They can act like human beings. And that itself is going to change everything that we consider real, And we've only been speaking about AI, there's gene editing, and those would have even deeper questions that if you can gene edit your children or your partners or change their personalities or your own personality, what would be those values? That would you turn them all fair? Would they all begin to look like you? Would that become the model of,
Oh dear, that would be a very bad choice. I just checked my genes, and I kind of have some genes I'm pretty happy with. Some of my mood genes, for example, are really top-notch. Everybody should be as happy as I am. But when it comes to kind of weight, set points, etc., now we can do so much better. But I think this is where we should think about powerful technologies carefully. Transhumanism is very much in favor of using powerful technologies in order to enhance the human condition. But there is an enormous amount of danger there, because if they're guided by the wrong values, we might disenhance the human condition. Indeed, many transhumanists were early on interested in existential risk. Much of the work on global disasters come originally from thinkers affiliated with transhumanism, because we realized that if the future could be radically better, by symmetry, it could also become radically worse. If you just think the future is a bit of flying cars and cool toys, then it's not that extreme. But if the future could involve post-human new species, it might also involve no human species whatsoever and no biosphere. So that motivated us to start working on reducing the worst risks. And generally, I think many of these powerful technologies, we might say, let's go slowly. Let's actually be careful about implementing superintelligence. The problem is, of course, going slowly is both practically very hard in a competitive world. And maybe us individually, I know many people saying, I'm a middle-aged transhumanist. I can't wait for life extension. Maybe we should just focus on life extension, and then we got plenty of time to take a century to figure out what to do about superintelligence. But I think that's unlikely. Unfortunately, the future is arriving really fast now, so we need to try and kind of surf the wave and have these debates. What are good life-affirming values? I'm, for example, very much in a liberal tradition. I argue for morphological freedom, that since we have a liberty to behave as humans freely, and we have a right to our bodies, we have a right to modify our bodies, and from that also follows the right not to modify the body. You can set up other rights ideas. Some of my leftist friends think that no, you need more positive rights. The government needs to supply you with support so you can actually live up to this. You libertarians only want freedom, but you still need money to do it. And that debate is worth having.
Right. You know, earlier the director said that there's no danger from AI. Eric Daimler said, yes, it's coming. Daniel said, we've got to take this very seriously. So I have to stop with that question. What do you think, Anders? Is that threat of superintelligence, AGI, you know, general intelligence, human competitive intelligence, is that a very big possibility? Is it round the corner? What's the time frame?
I think it is a very big possibility, and it might be a very dangerous one. I'm more optimistic than many of my friends. I think we can solve the alignment problem, but it might be a close call. I'm usually the most AI skeptic person around my office. I actually think the AGI is still mid-century away, not 10 years like many of my colleagues think that it might be. But the problem for me is, if I'm right, well, we have plenty of time to figure out how to do it safely and wisely. But if I'm wrong, maybe it's around the corner. So we should be working on the safeguards, working on ways of making AI systems understand human values and respect them, as if it was going to arrive next year. We probably are already running out of time on many things. But that is a good motivation to work. The kind of underlying transhumanist optimism for me means that the future could be glorious. So that is a reason to save it. But we should also be optimistic about our ability to influence it. Because many people think that, yeah, it's going to happen whatever we do. But I see a room full of people here who actually have a real shot at influencing the future. You might not agree with me. That's great. I think it's important that you go out and try to influence it. If we just let the future happen, it's probably pretty likely to be a bad one.
You know, we started this conference because we thought we are being changed while we sleep. So as you said, it's very important that we participate in this conversation and inflect that conversation, try and change the course of how all of this pans out. But by your logic, it is definitely coming and we need to engage with it. You know?
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much, Anders. It's a lot of food for thought. You know?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.